So I believe we're live. Just wanted to welcome everybody to the call, and especially John Hansen and Anders Lilvek. Thank you so much for joining. Today, what we're going to be talking about is MRO procurement specifically, but also how it's being revolutionized at the moment and how things are affecting it out there in the geopolitical environment. So, John, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit?
Well, you know what? You've been around a long time. I think almost everybody knows me. But John Hansen, I've been in high tech and procurement for over 40 years. I'm the author and the founder of the Procurement Insights blog. I've had the privilege of being on both the provider and practitioner side of the equation. One of the very first projects initiatives I've worked on was MRO for the Department of National Defense. And developed a self-learning algorithm nascent AI system in the late 90s that had some significant impact, and ultimately sold that company in the early days of the .com boom. So it's been a very interesting journey, and you put perspective on things when you can think back 40 years and look at where we are today. It gives you a unique view of the world.
I totally agree, John. Yeah, I can look back 40 years as well, unfortunately or fortunately, I'm not sure which. Anders, you're slightly younger, not much, but welcome as well. And I think probably most people know who you are, but just a brief overview would be great.
Yeah, so I don't fortunately have 40 years of procurement experience, but I have 25 before I started Focal Point. So I'm the founder of Focal Point, and we do procurement orchestration, among other things, and we do a lot of automation for very large companies that have global needs. And before like I said, before I started Focal Point, I spent 25 years in procurement. You probably know companies like Fannie Mae, QB Insurance, Webster Bank, and Citizens Bank, where I built and ran procurement and also procurement systems. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Anders. Well, let's get started. We've only got 28 minutes left, and we've got, I think, 6 questions to get through. So let's move on. So the first thing I wanted to talk about today was, how MRO is changing over the time. But if we could first of all explain, what are the main differences between MRO procurement and typical indirect procurement? And what are the main challenges? And you can compare and contrast to direct procurement as well if you want to. But really, what's the difference between the two? I would suggest, John, let me jump into you on that one.
Okay. Well, what's interesting, the dynamic indirect material consists traditionally of ORM, operation, resource management, maintenance, repair operations. I have the experience in the latter. One of the main things is that MRO products are not like buying direct products or even ORM products. Give you an idea, when I started with the Department of National Defense initiative, you could buy an MRO part to support their IT infrastructure at 9 in the morning, and it would cost $100. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that same part could be $1,000. The price fluctuation, that's where we came into over 10 years leading up to that, identifying 2 distinct commodity types: dynamic flux, which is MRO product, where the prices change very quickly over a relatively short period of time. And then you have what's known as the historic flat line, which are prices that you can negotiate with a contract, and they remain relatively stable with very little variance over an extended period of time. So once you have that, you then are able to look at it and say, okay, what type of procurement processes are best suited to manage that? And one of the earlier mistakes was that ERP systems focused more on direct material, would try a pull through of MRO, negotiate contracts, and then wonder why, for example, the government was paying $100 for a toilet seat. The reality is you have to understand the commodity characteristics and identify either dynamic flux or historic flat line. And these trends and characteristics hold true today.
Anything to add on this?
Yeah, I will add to that too. being has the R in MRO is repair. Oftentimes you can't predict demand, which then makes it challenging to actually plan in advance, right? And I managed facilities in real estate for a bank, and trying to get chillers for facilities in the middle of July was sometimes challenging, right? So maintenance part becomes much more important to make sure that you have the right maintenance for the things, but also sometimes things break, and then you need to find these assets, as and when they're needed. And so that makes another thing that's kind of challenging. It's like you can't put it off. You need to fix it, and then you're at the mercy of the market at that point. And being able to find things like replacement parts or finding substitution parts even is highly important when you think about MRO.
Could I just add to that, if it's okay? What's interesting is with MRO parts, they have what's known as the parent-child skew nightmare. You have a manufacturer's part, a service part, a warehouse part, etc. And of course, when you go out to the third-party market, especially a lot of these are small, medium enterprises, what part are you dealing with? And the ramifications of that are significant. For example, on a Friday afternoon at 1:30, we got a panic call from D&D in Montreal saying they want to get a $10,000 compact tape backup. And they needed it by Saturday. They couldn't be without it. And so the cost was going to go up, the cost of shipping was going to go up, but I had already started a parts compression function. And it turned out that they had 3 units in the Montreal area, just under different part numbers. And so what we were able to do is avert them from ordering something on a rush. Meanwhile, the stock, and this is traditionally what's happened with MRO, is that you buy stock in anticipation, to your point, Anders, of, well, we need it when we need it. So if we have some on hand, we'll use it. Ultimately, that's like compound interest. That stock, because of the challenges with parent-child skew and whatnot, the inventory grows. It actually never gets used, and it diminishes consistently in value over time, and it's not even over a long time. So I just thought I'd add that in there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was going to move on, but there is a question came in. Maybe we could jump onto that. Oh no, it's about getting into the show. So let's let's move on to the next question, which is probably a lot of what people are interested in at the moment. AI, machine learning. How can that transform MRO? And what are some of the strategies to enhance operational continuity in the future? It's a big topic. Everybody wants AI at the moment, and everybody doesn't want AI at the moment. So let's jump into that. I'm going to start with Anders on that one, if I may.
Sure, you absolutely can, right? What we're seeing out there now are new technologies that are able to span, for example, marketplaces that have availability of certain things. And let's say you have 3 suppliers that provide MRO materials for you. They can scan the marketplace with these 3 suppliers and return to you the least costly, but also the most available parts. So a part that doesn't have to travel particularly far, and a part that is also relatively cheap with a preferred provider, making the acquisition much more easy. The other thing is about figuring out what the demand is. So if you have facilities that are using the same types of parts, and 2 or 3 of them have started to, 2 or 3 parts are starting to break down in these machines, then you can probably predict that the other ones will as well. And it's about building that reliability model of being to be able to predict when things should be replaced. And I think a lot of folks now are putting sensors in machines to sort of sense the vibration, and when the vibration meets a certain point, it's time to go change something. So I think MRO is going to change dramatically, and I think we're going to try to get out of the repair as much as we can, and get into much more predictive maintenance of things as things are moving on.
Makes sense. So Internet of Things is important as well. Absolutely. John, what do you think?
Well, I have to tell you, it's a variable. The IoT, the preventive maintenance, the prediction. A few years ago, I did a study, and they're talking about being able to identify, and I think it was Fanning, which is the largest cat manufacturer or dealer. of the large machines there, and they had predictive usage and trends, so they knew when to turn a system off, when to start it, when it was going to. They were actually pre-alerted to that. So, Anders, to your point, the Internet of Things, in that regard, by having that remote maintenance and having the immediacy of that information, get you a little bit more proactive. And I think that's really a big part of what's transitioning. And again, it was I think it was called fanning, and it's a cat. You can pick it up on the case study on my blog. But here's the interesting point: you still have to start off with understanding agent-based modeling versus equation-based modeling. You cannot lead with technology and then fit the process to technology. What you need to do, and I call it human-led, is give you an idea. And I'll take just 2 minutes if I could to say this. And you've heard this story before, I know. When I was called into the D&D, the first question I asked, they said, we want to automate our MRO procurement. I was asked, well, what do you need to know? And I said, what time of day do orders come in? And they looked at me like I was talking a completely different language. But the reality is that the orders, if they came in at 4 o'clock, they had a poor SLA delivery. They were at 51% next day when they were supposed to be at 90% next day. Their costs went through the roof per the dynamic flux. And it literally created a series of problems. When we looked at it and said, what time of orders come in? What was the cause of the orders coming in later? We discovered an agent model, which is one agent is the service department. They were compensated, rewarded, or incentivized by getting as many service calls as they could in the day. So what they do is sandbag the orders. And there's a whole chain. So if you don't identify the agents beyond the procurement department, you are not going to be able to automate anything, or as the old saying goes, all you'll do is make a bad process fast. Now, I've condensed that story considerably because of time limitations, sure. but the reality is before you talk tech, you have to have a firm understanding of the agent internally and externally to the organization, and I think that requires the communication collaboration that is missing in so many implementations.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you, John. That was good. And I think it is absolutely critical. But let's move on to the next topic, which is also a critical topic for many, many people out there. And you'll see the beautiful windmills there. We're talking about ESG or sustainability. This is more important in some parts of the world than others now, but it's critical for the world. So how can MRO procurement adapt to support environmentally friendly initiatives without compromising reliability of production systems? So who wants to jump in on that one? I'm not going to dictate this time.
I'm happy to go, right? So I think we're doing this as a matter of fact, I think, across all of our buying portfolios these days, right? So we try to minimize the amount of waste in packaging and product. We try to figure out how we can get stuff from closer, so we don't have to ship things on the longboat from Asia, and to the extent possible, buy as close to home as we can to support nearshore operations. And I also think now that we are in uncertain times as it comes to political and tariffs and those kinds of things, we also need to consider being able to get things from unsanctioned countries, so to speak. So it becomes more complex, but it is definitely something that we have to deal with. And I think by and large, by doing the right things with local companies, we reduce our carbon footprint and we are more sustainable by just doing the right thing. Not necessarily for the sake of ESG, but by doing the right thing locally, we support ESG inherently.
Thanks.
John, I'm going to turn technical. I'm going to go now from agent-based modeling to the technical side. There's a theory that the government of Canada funded of mine called strand commonality, where in seemingly disparate strands of data, there are actually attributes that are related and collectively have an impact. The AI, the early AI used back then, and the AI that's available today is evolving, certainly. But the reality is you've got to be able to build in to the process or the system a way of measuring, tracking, and consistently measuring the performance on an ongoing real-time basis. For example, in the simplistic side of the equation, there were weighted importance put on things like historical performance, like quality, delivery performance, all of these things, and then current performance. Well, we can leverage AI technology to incorporate all of these things, and leveraging self-learning algorithms. What we can do is we can actually get real-time intelligence, real-time information that empowers us to make the best decisions at that moment. And the system then is continually learning, continually improving, continually updating. I mean, that's the great potential of AI. But again, I'm going to go back and say this. You can't get to that point until you get the agent-based model structured and know who the individual agents are. That's the gathering point. Because if you lose one piece of the puzzle, you're not going to have complete information. And you could end up like Bombardier, for example, with their building of the drones that ended up crashing in the Ukraine, and the implications that had for all the supply chain network.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good bridge, I think, into the next question, which is, there's a lot of potential at the moment for supply chain disruption. How can we enhance resilience and ensure the uptime of operations, considering, geopolitical pressures at the moment? I'm going to say the tariffs word, because that's really important to MRO as well. But also, other things that are going on out there in the world. How can we ensure that resilience and ensure the uptime? I'll let you keep talking, John. Maybe it bridges straight into what you were just talking about as well.
Well, I think what it comes down to, obviously, is that, first of all, tariffs are nothing new. Again, this is the whole thing. You can go back to the Smoot-Hawkins, 1930, and go back to the Buy American, etc. We're always going to find volatility in the marketplace. And there's going to be things that happen. There's going to be things like pandemics, which, refers to the Peloton case study. But the reality is what you need to do is resilience is in the ability to understand who or what all the agents are involved, because you can't track, you can't measure what you don't recognize. And I think what we have to do is remove those operational silos and realize the impact beyond the procurement department. We have to look at the suppliers, we have to look at the couriers, we have to look at the shipping, we have to take into consideration the port strikes and the trouble there. We have to take into consideration things that aren't in our control. And you have to be able to have the systems, and the technology is there if you have the right foundation of information. The technology is there to decide it. I'll tell you one for Shira Yuskovic. I had a panel discussion, and we were talking about Peloton, how their sales went through the roof when the pandemic hit. But because of the shipping lanes being shut down, the ports or whatnot, they couldn't fulfill those orders. And I had asked this simple question. What if they had the information that would have given them the heads up? And she said they had the information, they just didn't know how to read it. And that's really the key. You've got to understand your agent-based framework and platform and all the interconnecting parts. Otherwise, you're working in a silo, and that affects resilience. There's no reason to not have a resilient supply chain within the agent-based model framework. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. And Anders, what do you think?
I mean, John is right on, but I want to go back to sort of motherhood and apple pie, right? Like ultimately, the relationships that you have with your suppliers and your ability to have real discussions with them about how they can help you become more resilient and how they can use their innovations to help you be more resilient. It's not necessarily a sales shtick all the time, but you have to be open to feedback. Just because you've been doing something this way for a long time means it's right anymore. And opening up to suggestions and so on from people that do this for a living every day is actually not a bad idea. And also, when you talk about MRO, a lot of folks actually outsource a lot of these things, right? So incentivizing suppliers with uptime like you would a service provider like Focal Point also helps significantly, right? So then it becomes, what's your downtime? What's your mean time to repair? And start managing that more holistically. Obviously, that could be more costly, But at the same time, I think, if the critical parts and components and systems is very valuable to have that kind of visibility into it.
Mm-hmm.
And one more thing to add, if I could, you have to manage the entire process. With the D&D, we understood supplier sources. They were small, medium enterprises. They had no idea of how to prepare customs documents, weigh bills, and whatever else. And so you link in all the players. UPS worked with us. Then the Canada Revenue or the border service worked with us, so that when we gave the order to a supplier, the incentive was all they have to do is pick and pack, making it easy for them to do business. And in turn, it tracked the whole order right through to fulfillment. And I think that's really the key part as well, is being able to engage to that level, to your mom and apple pie point, Anders.
Yeah, absolutely. And the answer is not just to get more inventory, right? I remember working with somebody many years ago who had $80 million worth of MRO that they had not touched in 5 years. And most of it wasn't useful anymore. So yeah, completely agree. So moving on and actually expounding on something that Anders was just talking about with topic 5 here, talking about how we can work better with suppliers. Talking about how you can innovate is something you just spoke about, Anders. Do you want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think as procurement, as a profession, I think we tend to cut all suppliers over with the same cloth, so to speak. So I think what we need to do is figure out which suppliers are critical to the operation and treat them as such, right? So, you do good old project matrix, right? So what's the risk and what's the criticality of any supplier? And then you sort of say, well, if they really are critical to our operation, then we need to manage these suppliers as critical. So then doing things like measuring SLAs, sitting down and having real discussions with them on a regular basis, bring back the quarterly business review and really sort of have a bi-directional discussions about how you can work together in improving your operations goes a long way. And, we start seeing more and more of these now, especially as it becomes more and more regulations. So DORA just got enacted in Europe, and now, they require an executive sponsor, on the buy side, and you need to have QBRs, right? It's like, so we see a lot more of this happening now, and it's making comebacks, treating your suppliers as a relationship, as a strategic partner rather than a vendor, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Again,
John,
I heard an apple pie.
No. Well, you know what I have to say? There's a major U.S. retailer back in 2005 who asked me to fly down. When you come to MRO parts, what they did, they're supporting the IT infrastructure, is they said, what we're going to do is we're going to do a vendor compression strategy. We're going to, instead of having hundreds and hundreds of suppliers, we're going to pick the top 100, negotiate a volume purchasing discount. It's a new form of, it's an external form of inventory, by the way, Matthew. I'll get into that in a moment. Okay. But we're going to do that, and we're going to cut down our administrative costs because we only have to deal with 100 and we're not dealing with so many different variables. And after about a year, when they had some savings in the second and starting the third year, they looked and they said, the savings don't seem to be as robust. We're missing something. We don't know what it is. And so did an analysis. Their truth was limited to those 100 suppliers, which moved them further and further away from the whole market. And they found they were paying 23%, 22% above market price, because remember, we're talking about dynamic flux. The price keeps going down. Well, suppliers aren't necessarily, not in some cases, not intentionally, some cases, yes, aren't going to call you up and say, guess what, this dropped. And many of these MRO contracts, they'll go in low, knowing full well that the margin will be big on the end. And so what we looked, as we said, you've got to broaden your scope of engagement. In other words, your source of truth is only 100 suppliers in a market of 10,000 suppliers. The key is, how do you create the automation, but the processes before the automation to understand how to engage those suppliers. And that was very critical for them, because what they were able to do then is say, we're not treating MRO like direct material. What we're going to do is we're going to create a robust capability that allows us to not only source, but also be able to track and influence from start to actual delivery. And that's really the key. And that goes to, I think, Andre's point. You just can't apply one rule and one size fits all, especially when it comes to MRO.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. So the last topic I wanted to discuss is very close to my heart, because I've got this sign up above my head here saying focal point. But you know, how can focal point help companies to better manage and enhance MRO and operational management procurement? John, I'm actually going to jump to you first on this, if I may, and then leave Anders to round it out. We've got a couple of minutes on this one.
Okay. Well, you know what? Let me tell you something. I dropped about 90% of my client base last year. I write for practitioners and providers. I've written for Procurement Foundry, for SIG, all of these organizations. And I said, you know, the generational initiative failure rate over the last many decades consistently hovers around 80, 88%. It's not a technology issue. The technology is better than ever before. It's a matter of understanding the agent-based model. It's the understanding of the practical expertise and experience behind the technology. So I made a decision. I was going to work with a half dozen procure tech solution providers who actually got the agent-based idea, who understood the power of self-learning algorithms, AI, and all these other elements. And one of the six I chose was Focal Point, because I look at Focal Point as being an AI operating system. And you know, we've had this discussion beforehand, but the reality is you need to connect all of those elements and components together. You need to be able to do it in real time. And we're not talking about a technology integration. You know, that's SOA, service-oriented architecture. Remember those days? It was going to change and revolutionize everything. It doesn't. Technology does not revolutionize. It enables evolution, but it does not do it in and of itself. So you've got to look at the people behind the company and what is their expertise. And that's where, you know, I got excited about Focal Point in a couple of other companies too. But you're unique. And so you understand agent-based modeling, you understand MRO, you understand the business, and technology is an extension of your experience and expertise, not the definition of it. I don't know if that helps, but that's my experience.
Thank you, John. And Anders, obviously you know more about Focal Point than anybody.
Thank you.
Hope so. 5 years on.
Yeah, 5 years in today, actually. So yeah, so what I will say is we like to set up the process that makes sense for our customers, right? So in this particular instance, if you do an MRO process, you can start with the, you know, I need something signal. That could come from a system that feeds it into Focal Point, or it can be someone entering in something into Focal Point and say, I need something. The first thing we will do is guide those folks to a self-service channel. And if they can't find what they need there in the self-service channel, then it follows a process that is predetermined depending on what's being bought, the value, the price, whatever the case may be. The first stop along the way could be, does someone have this in inventory? And then from there, if they don't have it in inventory, then it will go down the happy path of acquisitions and doing whatever the process is, 2 bids and a buy, look at the marketplace, and whatever the case may be. But the beautiful thing about this to the end user is that all of these things are real time available and reportable to the customers. So not only do we set up processes that allow folks to, you know, minimize the amount of acquisitions that they have, but also doing it at the quickest pace and the lowest price. And I think that's what we ultimately want, right? You know, the pizza tracker helps a lot because customers can see where the thing is in the process of when are they going to get it. So that's, you know, I don't want to drone on and on and on, but the whole idea here is really all the data together and using that as part of the process to get things done in the most effective and efficient way.
Great.
Yeah. Can I just add one more thing here? Mark Berlin asked an interesting question about inventory owned and controlled and whatnot. May I suggest, Mark, that you contact Anders and I'll sit in on the call, because the New York City Transit Authority project was one which used time zone polling to access live inventory in strategic stocking locations that reduced inventory coverage and actually helped the suppliers turn their inventory faster. And that's the kind of creative thinking I see at Focal Point. So Yeah, anyway, I'd like to invite you to do that because Mark, there is an answer for that.
So Mark and I actually go back some, so we can definitely connect again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was going to say, I'm sure you know each other. I know both of you. So, and yeah, thank you, Brent and Mark, for your comments during the session as well. If anybody out there wants more information, I hope you do, please contact any of us on the call. Literally, if you want a more independent view, then contact John. But otherwise, our next webinar or podcast is going to be talking together with Market Dojo in a few weeks' time. The link is there. Please register now. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate your time and effort. And thank you, John. Thank you, Anders.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye now.